I'm going to talk today about human memory in general, and with special focus on declarative memory or conscious memory. So I'm going to be talking about how do we store information, how do we recall it, how do we forget it over time. And I'm going to start with the general definition of acquiring memory, which is about memory in general, which is acquiring information, storing it over time, and then accessing it when needed. I'm sure you all know that there is different kinds of memories in the human brain. So there is mainly, we can say it's mainly 3 different types of memories. So there is the super instant memory, which is called sensory memory, which is basically like a reflection of the outer environment, where it reflects everything that we see and we hear and receive them from the sensory. It's very large in capacity, but it's very limited in time. So for example, it lasts only 1 second for vision and few more seconds for hearing. And then this reflected information from the environment that holds a lot of information, we consciously spot our attention to certain bits of the information that we receive, and then this information is transferred to short-term memory, where we're consciously processing information. The short-term memory is a very limited memory. It holds chunks of information. It's on average about 4 chunks, and it lasts still it lasts a few seconds, but it's a lot more than 1 or 2. So it's about 20 seconds, 15 seconds, 18 seconds, around that. And it holds everything that we're thinking about right now, and we're processing. Then with enough deep processing, elaborative rehearsal, we transform information from the short-term memory to the long-term memory, where it's almost unlimited and almost permanent. So this is where learning is happening, when it moves from short-term memory to long-term memory. Long-term memory have all kinds of different memories as well. So there is the declarative or conscious memory, and there is the non-declarative one. So the declarative memory has 2 different types of memories. One is semantic, where we hold the things we know about the world and life in general, without the context, and the other is episodic, where we keep our memories, the events we went through, the personal experiences. And this is where I'm going to focus today. And there's also the non-declarative or non-conscious. So it holds for example, procedures, how we do things, the habits, the thing we're primed to do, and the classical work, the thing we learn through classical conditioning and other things, which is kind of unconscious or subconscious. So about the declarative memory, so it as I said, it refers to facts and events, semantic and episodic. Recall is conscious here. It's sometimes called explicit memory. And there is some evidence from neuropsychology and neuroimaging that there is actually differences between semantic and episodic memories. So if one memory is injured, the other is spared. Also, when we recall information from long-term memory to the short-term memory, to think about it like process it, or even just simple recall could alternate the information before putting it back to the long-term memory. So just thinking about it or recalling could update the memory in the long-term memory. For the episodic memory, as I said, it's a memory about events and personal experiences. It's a subjective sense of time. It's like mental time travel. When you think about a certain experience, you access everything about this experience. So it's they call it a holistic memory. So you think about all the dimensions, like the smell, the taste, the people who were there, the emotions, everything around one specific event. Even usually in the form of visual images. Yeah, and it's usually forgettable more than semantic memory. So you can forget about it a lot quicker than semantic memory. And then there is the semantic memory, which is when we learn something the first time, it could be stored in the episodic memory. But then when we lose the reference about the context when we learn the thing the first time, it moves to the semantic memory. So if you can remember, for example, when you learn the first time about, let's say, the capital of Switzerland, for example, you could, if you recently learned about it, you could remember the context, but after a while, you just remember the information without the context. So it's just facts. And it's organized based on meaning, where concepts are connected. And we're going to talk, my main focus today is about this kind of memory, because it stores our general knowledge about the world. Okay, so we are also gonna discuss how all of these facts are organized and stored in the semantic memory. There's a lot of theories about this topic. I'm gonna talk about some of them. For example, I'm gonna talk about schema theory. I'm gonna talk about network models that includes propositions, hierarchical networks, and spreading of activation. So I'm going to start with schema theory. So schema is a general structured way of storing information by shaping them around concepts that shapes our understanding of the world. So it's just like files of schemas where we have different concepts and everything that's related to that concept. It's like a script with gaps in it. We will fill it, so it shapes also our expectations about things. For example, if we have a schema for ordering food at a fast food restaurant, for example, and another like scripts for fancy restaurants. So there's different procedures happening, and actually scripts are a special kind of schemas where they're concerning a schema of events. Schemas in general could be about concepts or events. So facts are basic units of schemas. For example, palm is a tree, this is a fact, but a concept is a category of ideas. For example, a tree is a concept. It could be different kind of trees, but they all share a set of features. And schemas are organized set of concepts with all the relationship among them. So all the different concepts and all the different actions and connections between these concepts. And schema is activated by keywords or key concepts, and it affects the information encoding and recall. So when a certain schema is activated while you're perceiving a certain kind of information, you might encode the events based on the way your schema is. So schema is personal as well, and cultural, I believe. So, for example, ordering food, for example, restaurant dining in different countries is different. For example, in the UK, when you go to a restaurant, you usually wait to be seated. Somewhere else, not in all countries, you can just go and find a seat yourself. So you interact with the world, you shape your expectation, and also you encode and recall your memories based on your schemas. And there is a lot of interesting experiments about how schemas shapes our memory. For example, if you tell someone a story or a set of events and activate a certain schema, they would remember the details that's related to the schema that you initiated the story with. Or if you ask them, if you tell them a set of events and then to activate a schema afterwards, they would recall different details based on the schema you activated. So for example, if you tell a story about someone who visited someone else's house while they're not there, and you said a lot of give some details. For example, the back door was open, the house is recently painted, they have a big kitchen, for example, and so on. And then you activated different schemas, they would remember details differently. So for example, if you're saying that this is someone who's breaking in someone else's house, they would remember things like the back door was open. But if you tell them that someone is actually going and viewing the place because they consider buying it or renting it, you would remember other things like the recently painted walls, for example. And yeah, so things are remembered based on the schemas, which shapes the expectations, as I said. And also things that is schema related is better remembered than the things are not schema related. And sometimes things that's even not there, they're remembered if they fit the schema. And sometimes the things that actually there is altered based on the schemas that we have. For example, if you let someone wait for you in an office, for example, and then you meet them, and then you ask them about what they have seen in an office. If they have, they would actually recall their schemas about the offices. So they might say that they have seen a book while it's not there. They have also might not remember seeing something that does not belong to the office schema. And there's a lot of studies actually about this bit, and they're all interesting, and some of them are about eyewitnessing, testimonials and courts, and how they're not very accurate because of that. Yeah, and now I'm gonna move to the next. It's really awkward because I cannot see you guys. I feel like I'm talking to myself. So if you can talk, if you can, yeah, if you can discuss.
I didn't want to interrupt. Yes.
Hi, Fernando. I didn't know that you came because yeah, I have a problem with my Zoom. I cannot see people.
It's super weird, right?
So, sorry?
It's weird when you talk and
Yeah. So usually I like to look at people so I can tell they need me talking more about this bit, or they just get it and I need to hurry. So it's really annoying. Okay.
Is the thing of the schemas the same thing that you see in comic strips?
What do you mean?
So for example, you know, like comic strips normally have like 3 or 4 pictures, but you get the activity or the event, like the context, you know?
Yes, yeah. So it's like as I said, it's like a script where when you have enough clues and enough concepts and keywords, you will activate that schema. So you will have it already in your mind.
Yeah.
Okay. So moving to network models, there's something called propositions, which is simply verifiable statements whereas it's statements that you can say they're true or false. For example, a green apple is not a proposition because it's not a statement. A verifiable statement is two or more concepts with a relationship between them. It can be one or more propositions. The concepts can be time, places, people, objects, anything. And the relationships between them could be verbs or adjectives. For example, it could be has, or it could be is, or it could be used for example, like here, flat is a table. Sorry, a table is flat, actually. A chair used for sitting, for example, a chair has a back, and a chair is a furniture. So there is all kinds of different connections or links between concepts. And one thing important about this theory is that sentences with fewer prepositions are better memorized. So the simpler, the shorter the preposition is, it's simpler to be recalled. It's easier to be recalled. So for the schemas, for example, we have a set of concepts. Concepts are generalized categories of ideas. And then when put together in a sentence, for example, it forms a proposition. And then integrated proposition could form a schema about a certain topic or a certain concept or a certain experience or even a certain procedure. And these schemas shapes our understanding of the world.
Munirah, can you please explain again the part of notes and propositions? I got a bit.
The what?
The pass from notes to propositions in the next one.
So as I said, this is just putting the last two theories together. So we have concepts in general. Some of them are very simple, like a concept of a tree, for example. Then if you put a tree in a verifiable sentence, then this is a proposition, or even a belief. As I said, for example, bomb is a tree. This is a belief. For example, chicken is a bird. This is a belief, okay? And then when you put them in a set of concepts and relationship around a certain topic, for example, a farm. So there is a lot of things in the farm that's happening, that's there, a lot of animals, a lot of concepts and interaction between them. So there is a schema for a forest, for example. There is a schema for a different schema for a farm.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. And then we're going to talk about more network models. For example, this is Quillen hierarchical model. It says that information is saved in the long-term memory as a hierarchical network, where the child nodes inherit the features of a parent node. And it allows for what they call cognitive economy. So you do not have to repeat yourself the same features everywhere. So you like eliminate redundancy. So this actually theory says that there is no redundancy in the semantic features, but yeah, what's actually happening is that there is a level of redundancy. So most of the theories I'm talking about today, they have some pros and cons. They do not like fully capture what happens in the mind, but they do for a certain extent. So they have experiments that proves their validity, but there is also some critiques or counter experiments. So how do we know about, for example, how do we test this theory of hierarchical concepts? So as I said, there is parent features that is inherited. For example, an animal has a skin, it can move around, it breathes, for example. And then there is inherited animals like bird and fish. They have different feature that is distinct to them. For example, a bird can fly, but a fish cannot, obviously. So how did they test this in cognitive science? They used something called semantic verification task. And it's simply like this. So we have an animal, we have a bird, and we have Reuben, which is a certain kind of birds. They have different characteristics, for example, or actually specific characteristics, like they had red breast. So they ask people, they give them propositions or verifiable sentence, and they ask them to answer as quickly as they can if it's true or false. For example, they ask them a question about do Reuben eat worms? And if they say yes, whatever, they will usually get it right anyway. But the thing is, they're gonna measure the time, the response time, in milliseconds, so they can say know if the other piece of information, if the two concepts are stored very close to each other or far from each other. So, for example, when they ask them about the first very specific feature here, participants talk about 1.3 seconds. And then when they ask them about another feature, which is believed to be a feature of all birds, for example, they have feathers, they took a bit longer time. They took about 1.38 or around 1.44 seconds. And then when they asked them about a feature that is supposed to be about animals in general, such as Rubens have skin, they took even longer. So they took 1.47 milliseconds, seconds. So this experiment actually supports the idea of hierarchical network, that there is some feature that is very specific to the concept, that is stored very closely to the concept, and some are more general and a little bit stored in like a higher position or a bit more far position. There is also, as I said, problems with these models. There's a number of problems, but one of them, for example, is that some concepts are saved, for example, faster to verify than others, and they were supposed to be equally of the same level semantically. For example, different kind of birds are supposed to take the same time to reach the to verify. If you ask them about bird features, for example, if you say a Reuben is a bird, yes, a Reuben is a bird, or a Reuben can fly, for example, you would think that it's going to take the same time to verify this sentence as if you say ostrich is ostrich can has wings, for example.
But so, wouldn't that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, you can say.
Wouldn't that depend on the experience also of the person?
Experience?
Yeah, I mean, how familiar are you with some birds than others, let's say?
Yeah, but if I mean, we're talking about if you already know this bird very well.
No, but okay.
Yeah, so you can answer this question very quickly. But if you mean, there's another concept I'm gonna briefly talk about after this. Mm-hmm. But for example, what I'm saying now is that for both birds, all birds, for example, have feathers. Mm-hmm. But some birds are easier to verify than the others. So this is called the typicality effect. So some birds, for example, are more typical than others. We think about them as birds more than others. For example, Reuben is a bird more than ostrich is, or a chicken is. Mm-hmm. Also here, you can see that it's, as I said before a second ago, that not all it's not full cognitive economy. For example, we have to repeat some things. For example, ostrich cannot fly. So even though it's supposed to inherit this from here, it has to change it here. So there is a bit of redundancy anyway with this model, I mean. Yeah, so what we just talked about is there is something called prototype theory. I'm not going to explain this a lot, but it says that some member of category is better instances of that category than others. And if you ask people to think about furniture, it's very likely that they're going to think about a chair than, for example, a TV. So there is different level of representation or level of typicality for different concepts. And this is actually called prototype theory. So, and it could be different from one person to another. And it's actually based on things like how many central features this example have or instance have compared to others. So, yeah. So there came another model, which is the most popular model now, which is called spreading activation model. And it brings back the network model we just talked about, but it changes some things. Like, for example, the length of the link matters. So it's not just that all children of a certain node are the same. So they could be stored in different distances from the parent node. So the less related concepts are, the longer the links is. And this actually captures the typicality effect we just talked about. So the ostrich could be stored a little bit further away from the bird than compared to Reuben, for example. It's also about the search in the network. So it's not very hierarchical. It's just a network. So the search, when you ask someone when you give them a proposition with two concepts, for example, the two different concepts are gonna be activated, and then the activation is gonna spread through the links and the adjacent concepts. And if these two activation intersect, then the answer is yes. So I can show you later, but the long activation travels from the initially activated node, the weaker it gets. So the longer travel, the other concepts get partial activation until it's not activated anymore. I mean, adjacent nodes are not activated. For example, here you can see that if you activate some of these nodes, activation is going to spread through the network and partially activate other nodes until it reaches another fully activated node. And then a person can be able to verify a proposition. It also represents other things. If you can see here, for example, so red is a color and it's connected to orange and blue and other colors. It is also connected to other concepts such as roses, such as apples, such as fire engines. And these concepts themselves are connected to other things like fire engines as a truck. It's also connected to a house, a fire, and so on. So there is a categorical relationships. You can see there is like colors, there is flowers here, there is fruits here. And there is also the degree of association. So a certain node can be connected to one other concept or one other node, or could be connected to many others. So there is a degree of association to each concept. And there is the typicality, where the length of the link makes a difference. So if someone is really close to a concept, that's going to be more activated when that concept is activated than one that's far away from the concept. And as I said, the spread of activation is what makes us actually recall information. So and activation is limited, so it cannot like activate the whole network. It's just going to activate the main concepts and what's around them. And as I said, the time is dependent on the travel distances. And this actually explains the priming that I talked about, and I mentioned last, not last, yeah, few weeks ago, which is when you think about certain concept, you actually partially activate adjacent concepts, so they're more present in the mind than others. So, and this is used actually a lot in behavioral economics for all kinds of applications, but it happens a lot, and it also explains a lot of things. For example, there's something called I'm sure you know it, which is the tip of the tongue. When you know something but you cannot remember it, but you know that you know it, because there is not enough activation have reached that concept. So, for example, if you want to know someone's name, and then you want to remember them, that you know them, but you need to think about more features about them. For example, if you not want to know remember a football player name, for example, and you would try to think about other things like the what team they play in, and for example their partner's name, all other things. You would try to activate this adjacent node so you can send enough activation to that node, and then you can remember it. But also this one is not as well. There is some critiques on this model anyway, but it's I think it's the most popular one. It's the one that explains what happens in the mind the best, I think. And this is all about the models. And now I'm going to move to how do we forget about things and how do we remember things in general. So forgetting, when we're talking about short-term memories, there is two reasons to forget things that we recently have had to think about or have had in our short-term memory. There is the effect of decay and the effect of interference. So decay is simply when you do not use that information anymore, or you stop thinking about it, it just fades away. And there is the interference effect, which is when a new information interfere with the previous one, or the other way around, and then just it fades away because one has replaced the other. And there is actually two types of interference. One is retroactive and the other is proactive. So if, for example, here in this example, if you think someone's name is Julie and they told you that actually their name is Judy, then the new information would delete the previous information and you would simply forget about Julie and remember Judy all the time. But if you, for example, know that someone is called Julie, and then someone else called that person Judy, you would not keep the other name, the new information, long in your short-term memory because you know it's wrong. So it's just gonna fade away, and you're just gonna keep the previous information. This is about the short-term memory. When we talk about long-term memory, so if we lose an information in the long-term memory, it's usually because of either inability to access the information. So if we cannot remember, as I said just a second ago about the tip of the tongue, if you cannot remember a piece of information, maybe you do not have enough clues to help you activate that information or remember it. Or maybe because it's deleted from the memory, because you do not you have when you encoded the information the first time, you after that you thought it's not really useful. You do not really need to remember it. You do not actually use it anyway. So if you do not use it for a very long time and you do not even think it's useful to remember, over time you're gonna delete this information from the long-term memory. While for remembering, if we talk about short-term memory, there is something called maintenance rehearsal. There's two types of rehearsal actually. The maintenance rehearsal keeps the information for longer periods of time than, for example, 20 seconds or 18 seconds, just by simply repeating that piece of information. So it's like refreshing the information by continuous attention provided to this information by repeating it in the so think just simple repeating. But if you repeat it but not just simply repeat it, but actually think about it and elaborate and thinking about it and deeply process it, then this what transfers an information from the short-term memory to the long-term memory. And this is actually what is called learning, where you're not just exposed to this information, you're actually thinking about it and processing it deeply and connecting it to other concepts. And this is what creates the associations. So the more you think about it, the deeply you think about it, in different aspects and dimensions also, and in relation to different concepts, it will be more present in the long-term memory. Yeah, so these are two different kind of rehearsal or repetition. But from what we just said earlier, there's other things that makes remembering things easier. So what do you think that could also makes it easy to remember a certain piece of information?
Well, my mind immediately goes to things like emotional context, but that's not what we talked about earlier. But if something evokes a strong emotion, you're likely to remember it. I also imagine there'll be a sort of sweet spot when it comes to similarity of concepts, because if you're trying to remember two concepts and they're very similar, it might be hard to differentiate between the two. But if they're too different, it might also be hard. So you want there to be sort of a way to allow these concepts that you're trying to learn to associate together, I imagine. So I imagine something to do with similarity, another to do with emotion. And then off the top of my head right now, I've not got any others.
What do you think emotion is? Emotional things are easier to remember?
They have more, well, you can think about it from a lot of different perspectives, I suppose. So you can think about it from an evolutionary standpoint, where it's if something evokes an emotion, it's very likely to be beneficial for your survival. And if it's beneficial for your survival, you're going to want to remember it. So, for example, imagine if you're, you walk down a path that you walked down before, this is back, in tribal times, and then you see like a lion footprint or something. You're going to immediately associate that with things like fear and panic. You're surprised that it's there. You're trying to sort of make sure you keep that information there, so you can go warn other people, you can go do all of this. It's just beneficial for survival in that case. But
yeah, it's also the importance you assign to the information. It's the depth of processing, so we think about it more often. So if you go through an emotional situation, you would think about it more often. So repeated elaborative rehearsal would also increase their presence in the memory.
Yes, agreed. It makes me think about, I don't know if you guys have ever had one of those scenarios where you've just done something incredibly embarrassing and you never forget it for as long as you live, right? You do it once and then it never leaves you again. But then, like you say, that's the thing that you're going to be rehearsing, like when you're falling asleep at night, right? You're going to be thinking, oh, I shouldn't have said that. Oh, I should have done this. I should have done that. So yeah, all of these concepts that you're talking about do kind of all layer onto the same thing. So it's whether or not does emotion add anything extra to it, or is it just making use of all of these processes? I think it's doing both. I think it's adding extra and using these processes. But yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah. Anyone else? So we just talked about, for example, schema theory. So things that belong to the same schema or things that fits the schema are actually easier to remember. For example, I have seen an experiment where people are giving a story that does not really make sense, and it has all sorts of things that are not typical. And when and there were some things that were typical. So when participants were asked about the details, they remember the things that are schema typical much better, and they change the things that are not very schema typical. For example, a piece of that story was about a woman helping a man in something. I think like a physical thing, like I don't remember what it was, but I remember that participants, when they repeated the story, they said that the man helped the woman doing that thing. So they changed the memory based on their schemas. Also, there is, as I said, simpler ideas, most recent, the semantic things aspect of the thing, rather than verbal or visual. But I'm talking about concepts here. For example, thinking about a word or something, you would remember the meaning more than you would remember the voice. It was saying the word, or the shape of the font, for example. So the semantic is as more it's much deeper processed than the other things. So it's easier to remember the semantic. So you might not remember the exact word, but you might remember something similar to that word. So moving on, that we talked about these things, we can think about them in relation to memes. So I was thinking that all of these are related to memes, and the four main aspects of memes, which is storing memes, retrieving memes, the transferability of the memes, and the mutations that happens to the memes. So yeah. So also, I mean, I watched the last meeting recordings, and you were talking about the potential to be transferable. And is there any things that is not transferable? And I think we should also think about the level of transferability. So, for example, you can easily transfer things from semantic memory or semantic things, but how easy is it to transfer personal experiences, subjective experiences, things in episodic memory? But actually, I was talking about this to a friend of mine. She's doing English literature. And I told her, can we actually transfer personal experience? Can we make someone feel what we feel about something just by telling them, for example? And she told me that there is something in literature that is called, she came across different concepts that is similar to this concept, which is, for example, there's something called shared trauma. And it's mainly talked about in the Holocaust, for example. And there's also something called inherited nostalgia, which is the experience Palestinians have who have left Palestine for many generations ago, but they're still remember. And I have seen a movie about this, actually, about someone where their dad lives back in Palestine, and they still have the same, it seems like they have the same memory, although they have never been there. So they do have like these imagery and how things were, and for example, the smells, the breeze, the scenery, about the same views, although they have never been there. Just they were told by their elderly about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I was, yeah.
It is very interesting, actually. This whole idea of, can you accurately, turn episodic memories into sort of coherent memes that get unpacked in the same way in other people's brains. And I do think it's probably something to do with the similarity of it. So if you're part of the same culture, so we're talking about things like culture when we're talking about memes, I imagine it's easier to sort of get across an episodic memory to somebody of the same culture. So if I was to say, like, on a Friday night, I got some fish and chips and sat down to watch something that's common on TV in your area, somebody else is going to be like, oh, I know exactly what that's like. I don't need to give or offer too many words to get across that episodic kind of memory in it's not going to be super detailed, but it doesn't need to be, because they have the rest of the information that they can fill in themselves, because they've already been in that scenario and have those prior associations.
Yeah, but you already do have the personal experience. I'm talking about people, for example, who have the experience of someone else's. I mean, they have never been through that experience. For example, the Holocaust.
Yes, it's true.
I don't know if this applies, but I was thinking about the thing you were saying of Palestine people, you know?
Mhm.
In Chile, there's a lot of people from Palestine, actually.
Sorry?
In Chile, there's a lot of people there are lots of people from Palestine. I don't know why, but there's, and the thing is, I have a very good friend, and they always cook the same food,
Mm.
you know? So I was thinking kind of maybe this cultural thing of cooking the same food, using the same ingredients, still kind of serves as a medium to preserve that kind of memory you were saying.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So yes, I think there are gonna be other things that help inherent that experience. But I still think it's fascinating that you can remember things and have the same emotions that your parents are having, for example, or have had. I mean, I think it's really hard unless it's very important to you and the person is sharing you with the experience. I think it's, I mean, to have it in your, this person who was talking about the movie I have seen, for a person who was, it's called, the movie is called Fadia's Tree. And she's talking about her father's feelings when his father, her father actually left his village when he was 10 years old. So she, when her father has passed away many years ago, she still remember everything about the emotional experience about his 10 years old father, her 10 years old father. So
do you think what we're talking about here is sort of like the powers of things like stories to be able to put people into specific stories that allow scenarios that allows you to experience the emotions of somebody else? So, for example, culture, it can be passed down through stories, and you can get very strong and emotional stories about things that have happened in the past, which a lot of people in that culture will share a strong emotion towards. I'm not explaining this very well, but
I see. If you're able to pass, instead of passing the meaning, you pass the schema, and with the schema, you interpret the meanings, right? Something like
yeah,
that?
you can sort of, we put the meaning onto like stories, for example. Each and every one of us will come away with a different interpretation. But if you've made a story very well, it will be mediated in such a way that everybody will be feeling similar enough emotions to it. And then obviously you can talk about it. You can see how other people feel. And then also there's the social learning theory aspects to it. So, you have that cultural story that gets passed down, and people have, start experience the emotions or, something similar to the emotions that maybe their ancestors felt. I've lost my point. What was I saying?
So they even learn the reactions.
Yeah, so you got the social learning theory. So if you see your parents having an extremely emotional reaction to a story or a specific event, it's likely that you'll also pick up on that, and you might, start having the same sort of feeling, So sorry, Karen.
Sorry, yeah. So do you think it's possible to transfer personal experiences as they are?
Not as they are, but similar enough. I think that's what a story is in some circumstances. Like you can read horrible, like you talked about the Holocaust earlier, you can read horrible stories that people go through. And there's not many people alive who can read those stories and not be like extremely emotionally affected by what's going on. And it's sort of like you're putting yourself in their shoes almost, a kind of like an empathy mirror neuron kind of reaction. So
as far as we know, I think it's impossible to transfer experience, right?
Yeah, so actually impossible to transfer the experience as a whole, but to transfer enough of the associations within the experience that you can have sort of a vicarious experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Of that.
So you transfer the way to interpret something.
Yeah. And it'll always be slightly different, which kind of comes onto this mean mutation idea, right? Because a story and episodic memories are so complex, they have so many different components, and therefore so many different sort of stacked associations. You're probably not going to get all of them across very perfectly, but you'll get enough of them across, and enough of the meaning. I suppose it comes back to that term, the meaning, across, that you can have a slightly mutated experience. So yeah.
How about the non-declarative memories? Like, for example, the classical conditioning.
Yes.
Example,
Can you say, for example,